Hello, everyone. Hope you're having a fantastic day. My name is Kmart, and I want to talk about some basketball. And today, we are carrying on with our series of videos here, previewing the first ever in-season tournament in the NBA. And we've gone through 4 of the 6 groups for that in-season tournament so far, and we're getting down to now the final group for each conference. So, if you're unfamiliar with the format for these videos, I'll just recap it real quickly. We talk about each of the 5 teams in these groups for group play in the in-season tournament. We're going to divide those 5 teams into 3 categories, those categories being favorites, contenders, and long shots. Those groups will be sort of representative of the team's expectations, so to speak, how likely they are to win the group that they are in. So we'll divide the 5 teams into those 3 sections. Once we've done that, I'll talk about one team that I think is the most likely to exceed those expectations, and one squad that I think is most likely to maybe disappoint and fall short of the projected spot I have them in. So that is it. We are going to sort of jump into our next group here. Before we do that, though, one last plug. This is, I think, now the 5th video in this series. So if you want to see any of the previous videos and the previous groups that we talked about, as of right now, that is Western Conference groups A and B, and Eastern Conference groups A and B. There will be a link to the playlist in the description of this video, and there should be a link somewhere up in the top right of your screen right about now as well. So feel free to check those out if you want to see any of the other teams. But with all of that out of the way, we are talking about Group C in the Eastern Conference here, our final Eastern Conference group. And that group consists of the Boston Celtics, the Brooklyn Nets, the Chicago Bulls, the Orlando Magic, and the Toronto Raptors. So, well, of all the groups that we've seen so far, this one is kind of the most I was going to say interesting. That just feels like too generic a word here, but this is the one where I feel there's going to be the most maybe uh debate about, in terms of me maybe sort of reaching for one team or the other, or the value that I put in teams differing from the value that a lot of maybe other fans would. But we'll sort of get into that as we go here, because when we start things from the top with the favorites here for East Group C, that part at least should be pretty straightforward for everyone's perspective here. In terms of the favorites, there's only one squad in this slot, and that is the Boston Celtics. And it's pretty straightforward, right? The Celtics were one of the best teams in the East, and they seemingly got a little bit better this off season with the trade for Kristaps Porzingis. That gives them a unbelievably talented trio here, right? You've got Tatum, you've got Brown, you've got Porzingis. You have more than enough strength, at least on the offensive end, to carry this Boston squad. But there is maybe a little bit of a question on the defensive end. Last year, the Celtics were really one of the better defensive teams in the leagues. I don't remember the exact number, but they were sort of in elite territory. But now, Marcus Smart ends up going to Memphis. Grant Williams ended up being traded to the Dallas Mavericks, as the Celtics were kind of trying to free up some space to make the Porzingis trade work. Also, maybe wanted to clear the books a little bit for Jaylen Brown's massive contract extension as well. So those were 2 of the better defenders on the team. 2 of the better defenders in the league, actually, for that matter. And they're no longer here. So you do have to expect that the Celtics defense will regress at least a little bit down 2 of its better defensive players, right? But I get the feeling the Celtics are still going to be okay. Maybe they do slip from that elite level. Maybe they're not a top 5 defense, but if they could remain, a top 10 or a top 12 defense, I think that the offensive firepower they have now with this sort of big three of Tatum, Brown, and Porzingis should still be able to overpower their opponents, even if the defense does take a step back. So the Celtics, to me, still very clearly the top squad, at least in this group. In terms of the Eastern Conference as a whole, maybe we have a different discussion about that. But in this group, at least, they should be on top. But that takes us to section number 2, the contenders for this group. And here's the part where things get a little bit dicey in terms of my predictions. I have 2 teams in this section. Those 2 teams are the Brooklyn Nets and the Toronto Raptors. So we'll start by talking about Brooklyn here, because there is a pretty sizable caveat in this one, and that is the health and mental readiness of Ben Simmons. Right? He said he wants to play. He said he's at 100%. He says he's locked in mentally, and if all of that is true, then the Nets in this category really is not something I think most people could nitpick. The Nets look pretty solid right now. Obviously, you're coming down from, well, maybe that's not the right term, but you're trying to recover from a massive forced overhaul of your team after the Kevin Durant trade, not to mention sort of losing Kyrie as well. But overall, they feel like, or it looks like, they're not in the worst position ever, right? Mikal Bridges is obviously a very talented player on both ends of the floor. We're seeing him in the offseason sort of maybe getting a little bit more attention brought to himself as well with some of his international play. But the Nets have a lot to build around, right? They've got Bridges. They've got guys like, okay, there's a little bit of an age discrepancy here, but, Cam Thomas, Cam Johnson, guys who can score points when needed, right? They still got Claxton down low. They still got potential with this lineup. They just need it all to sort of come together in the right way. And if Ben Simmons is healthy, I think he can contribute as well. But even without Ben Simmons, I think the Nets do have a shot here, right? Their potential is going to have to very quickly rise to the surface here, right? It cannot be Mikal Bridges having to go out there and score 30 to 40 points a night for them to win games. Some of the other players are going to have to step up, but compared to some of the other teams here, like the Raptors, like the Bulls, like the Magic, who I think have bigger and harder questions to answer, they feel like they're in a better position. Which, yeah, I know. Yeah, it's still not great, but it's all relative to the other teams. So I put the Nets in the contenders category, but now we'll talk about the other team in that section, and that is the Raptors, because they're in a very, very strange spot here. But I think that as a team, they might be in a better position here, even after losing Fred VanVleet, which I know sounds crazy, but hear me out here. They pick up Schroeder to replace him. And yeah, Schroeder is not nearly as strong of a threat on the offensive end, and he probably never will be at this point in his career. But he should be a reliable ball handler. He is someone who can run your offense. And I think for the Raptors, they're hoping to make something happen here similar to what the Atlanta Hawks are trying to do when they traded away John Collins. The idea of having Fred VanVleet now out of the lineup could potentially funnel the ball more and have the offense focus more around Pascal Siakam, who is very clearly the cornerstone of this roster unless he's traded. So the idea was that maybe splitting the offense, not down the middle, it wasn't really an even split, but a partial split between Siakam and Fred VanVleet was maybe not what the Raptors wanted or not what was most efficient for them. Now, this roster is very much a situation where Siakam is the first option every single time, and you're surrounding him with guys like Trent Jr., like Scotty Barnes, like OG Anunoby, who hopefully contribute in a more consistent fashion, but will do so as a very, very clear second or third option to Siakam, right? They are the supporting cast around Pascal Siakam as the star player. Maybe this is a scenario where streamlining those offensive sets and taking Fred VanVleet's touches out of the equation now results in something that's pared down and more efficient. I know I am kind of stretching at this point, but it still feels like the Raptors are in a better position compared to some of the teams, right? Siakam is still there. The guys that I mentioned, Trent Jr., Barnes, Anunoby, they're good. They've got potential. They haven't broken out just yet as that sort of clear sidekick to Siakam, but maybe this is the year where that happens. Maybe the fact that the team re-signed Jakob Poeltl puts them in a better spot as well, because he is or was relatively solid for them in the games that he did play when he was sort of picked up halfway through the season. So I don't know. This is another sort of situation where it's all sort of relative, much like the Nets. The Raptors have questions. The Raptors are not what I would consider to be stable at the moment, but they are more stable than some of the other teams. So that does it for the contenders section here. Brooklyn and Toronto in there. But now we move on to the long shots. And this is where things can get a little bit sad depending on your perspective. In the long shots category, I have the Chicago Bulls along with the Orlando Magic. So, we'll start it off on a positive note. We'll talk about the Magic here because I think Orlando is a team that is on the rise for sure, right? Paolo Banchero is an incredible young talent, right? We saw that last season with his time with the Magic, ended up winning Rookie of the Year. We are now seeing it with his play for Team USA. He is very much a player that the Magic are happy to have and will be building around in the future. And they've already started that building process. There's a lot of sort of talent that's been stockpiled and just kind of built, maybe not built, but at least placed around Banchero here, but it hasn't really come together yet, right? It hasn't coalesced into something I think is clear enough to really put the Magic any higher than the long shot section. I think by the end of the season, they absolutely improve upon their win total from last year. They had, I want to say, 34 wins. I'm pretty damn sure that they could beat that with really only marginal improvement from the roster. So by the end of the year, the Magic will probably be in a better spot than they were last season, but I don't think that that happens in the first couple of months here, right? Maybe Banchero comes flying out of the gates after playing with Team USA in the offseason, and he's lighting it up from the early stages, but as good as he is right now, I don't think he's good enough to just drag this Magic team all the way into a, what, I'm not sure what they call it, but a second round sort of run in the in-season tournament. I don't think he plays so well by himself without help that the Magic get past group play solely based on that. That's just not going to happen. But yeah, by the end of the season, the Magic will be better. But in November, when group play games are being played, not so much. But that takes us to the Chicago Bulls. And this is where I said, things get a little bit sad, get a little bit pessimistic, because it does feel rough to put Chicago here, especially considering I put Toronto, a team that had kind of similar struggles throughout the second half of the season in last year's campaign. I put them a section above here, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot of Bulls fans who, would ask questions about that, but it's a tough scenario. Compared to teams like Toronto and Brooklyn, it feels like the Bulls seemed to largely be kind of content to stand still while their rivals tried to make moves, right? The Bulls are still kind of reeling from the Lonzo Ball situation, the news that he's not really coming back anytime soon. I think there was a comment that Lonzo Ball himself sort of made recently where he said he felt bad for the front office and for the general manager because he felt like they had built a team around him that could have found success, but he got hurt and couldn't really be the primary ball handler, the leader, the floor general for that team that was meant to be built around him, which, yeah, that really does sum it up. They built a team around having a guy like Lonzo Ball as their point guard, and then they don't have him. It's part of the reason the Bulls are still struggling to find a consistent starting point guard to this day. DeRozan and Levine are a very potent duo on the offensive end. They can score the hell out of the ball. There's no question about that. But neither one of them is really the guy who primarily runs the offense or facilitates for other players. They're kind of primary scorers, and that would not have been a problem if someone like Lonzo Ball had been there to just feed them the ball over and over and over again. But yeah, that hasn't happened, and apparently it's not going to happen anytime this season from what the word about Ball's continued injury is. So you just gotta kind of keep trying to play around that. They're trying to find a solution at the point guard position, but we'll see, right? Because the play from people who have been put in that position previously has been kind of inconsistent. But the health of Lonzo Ball is something that Bulls fans have long sort of used. Well, not long, it's been a couple of years, but they've used it as a talking point, right? That this team was sort of meant to have Lonzo Ball, that they would be better if they had a healthy Lonzo Ball. And absolutely, that is true, right? I would be hard pressed to find someone who would disagree with a Bulls fan on that point in particular. If Lonzo Ball were healthy, this team would be better. But he's not healthy, and he hasn't been for a while. And the Bulls have not figured out how to pivot away from what their plan originally was into something that will still work. So they're in a rough spot. Some of their guys have certainly gained experience, right? Their young players are coming up. You've still got DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine for at least a little while longer. They re-signed or extended, re-signed, not sure which one it is, but they've still got Vucevic in the lineup. So there is hope if you're the Bulls, but it's just that. It's hope. It's not expectation from my perspective, because this lineup looks a hell of a lot like what they had last year. And what they had last year by end of season limped into the play-in and then didn't actually make it all the way into the playoffs proper. So I don't know if we could expect too much more from them. And in the early stages of the season, I feel like the Bulls are definitely a team that could be sort of slow to pick up their momentum and find their stride. So I've got them in the long shot section for now. I would very much like to see them, beat out those expectations, but I'm not holding my breath for it. But that is all 5 teams divided into the categories here. So, as a recap, we've got the Boston Celtics in the favorites section here, the Nets and the Raptors in the contenders category, and then down in the long shot section, we've got the Bulls and the Magic. So, with that being said, time to move things along here. One team to exceed expectations and one team to disappoint. In terms of the most likely to overperform, I'm going to go with the Brooklyn Nets. I talked about sort of a lot of things for them, right? Ben Simmons' health, Mikal Bridges' play, bench guys potentially like Cam Johnson and Cam Thomas, Nick Claxton, all these parts, all these moving parts that have to sort of come together and align properly for the Nets to find success. But if the stars all do align, if everything that I outlined goes to plan for the Nets, they're going to be dangerous, right? If Ben Simmons comes back at 100%, if he commits fully to being that sort of point guard first, right? If he's not looking for, 20 points a game, instead he's looking to threaten for a triple-double, most nights that he's out there. If Mikal Bridges continues to be both an elite defender and a strong scorer like we saw in the second half of the last season, if, again, Cam Johnson, Cam Thomas, guys like Spencer Dinwiddie even can hit their strides early and contribute consistently, in the first couple of months, the Nets could just absolutely blow everyone else out of the water, right? While Toronto and Chicago and Orlando are struggling to find their momentum, while Boston is still trying to figure out exactly how the Porzingis situation is going to work, the Nets could maybe take advantage of that and push out early, win a couple of those head-to-head matchups in group play, and set themselves up nicely. It would not take too much here. It's 8 games in group stage play. The Nets could steal a couple of extra ones to put them in contention. Of course, that is if everything goes perfectly for them. If some of those moving parts don't quite align, then the Nets could struggle just as much as those other teams I mentioned. But the potential is there, so we'll put them in that most likely to overperform section. In terms of most likely to underperform, though, that's got to be the Toronto Raptors. And this is where I sort of balance out, maybe reaching earlier and putting them in that contenders section, because it could just as easily go wrong for the Raptors, much like the Nets on the other side of this. I outlined all the moves that were made in the offseason that I thought might help the Raptors, right? But there's no guarantee that any of this works. There's no guarantee that Schroeder is able to be a better facilitator than Fred VanVleet was. There's no guarantee that Siakam benefits from having the offense being more focused around him and taking Fred VanVleet's sort of part of the offense away and maybe funneling it more into Siakam. There's no guarantee that someone like Anunoby or Gary Trent Jr. or Scotty Barnes actually steps up and becomes that sort of clear number 2 guy behind Siakam. So a lot of the reason why the Raptors were put in that contenders category was being optimistic about the choices that they had made. If that optimism fails, and if those choices don't work out, then the Raptors could drop in those standings very early and very quickly as well. I think I just said the same thing twice, early and quickly, whatever. But you know what I mean. The Raptors could struggle massively if all does not go well for them, and they could very easily find themselves at or near the bottom of the standings in this group. So, because of that volatility, I guess we'll say, the Raptors have to be my choice here for the most likely to sort of disappoint and fall short of their projection. So, we shall see how this group plays out, because it is a very strange scenario. Boston is sitting up there at the top. That part, at least, I'm not really going to tinker with, right? I mean, sure, something could go terribly wrong for that team, but short of someone getting hurt, they should still be one of, if not the best teams in this group. And then everyone after them has massive amounts of question marks and what ifs and hypothetical scenarios playing out around them, right? The Nets need to see if Ben Simmons comes back. They need to see what Bridges and some of these young players can do. The Raptors are desperately trying to avoid a full rebuild and trying to avoid rumors that they're trading Siakam away. The Bulls are... Yikes. The Bulls are in basketball purgatory, effectively, at the moment, and they're not sure what the plan should be going forward. And the Magic... Well, honestly, the Magic are probably okay with where they're at right now, but they need to improve. The rebuilding process is now sort of underway for them. They've got the talent. They now need the development. So it's a rough one out here for the Eastern Conference Group C, but it's going to make for some interesting basketball once the season gets underway. But those are my thoughts on this group. Please feel free to share some of yours if you want to. Do you think that this is sort of a situation where we're looking at either the Celtics or the rest of the field? Do you think one of the Nets, the Raptors, the Bulls, and the Magic might just be able to slip in there and steal away the top spot in this group? And what do you think about the scenarios for some of these teams, right? For the Nets, for the Raptors, for the Bulls, I have them effectively balancing on a knife edge in terms of everything could go well for them and work out and they could be in a great position, or everything could sort of fall apart and the team just falls to the bottom of the standings. So which side of that coin do you lean on for any of those teams in particular? Please feel free to let me know. But other than that, thank you all so much for watching, and I will talk to you later.